Picture yourself moving through a river valley in the Middle East 90,000 years ago. You've been following a herd for 2 days, your group trailing behind you, quiet and cautious. Then something moves on the far ridge. Not an animal, a person, but not quite one you recognize. Heavier brow, wider nose, a shorter and stockier build, like it was shaped for a cold you've never known. For a moment, neither of you moves. You can't tell if this is danger, a stranger, or something in between. You're face to face with a Neanderthal, and they're staring right back at you. This wasn't a one-time moment. It played out thousands of times, across tens of thousands of years, in valleys, caves, and coastlines throughout Eurasia. And how those encounters unfolded didn't just shape two species. It shaped the person reading this right now. For a long time, the assumption was that humans had always walked this planet alone, one species on a solitary climb to the top. That's simply not true. And the real story turns out to be stranger, messier, and far more intimate than most people would guess. When you picture other humans today, you picture other humans today. You picture other people, different countries, different languages, but the same species. And if stories like this, the ones history almost erased, are the kind of thing that keeps you up at night wondering what else we don't know, this channel's built for you. Hit subscribe and drop a like, because it genuinely helps more of these get made. Let's get back where we left. You've never had reason to wonder whether the person across the valley was even the same kind of being as you. 100,000 years ago, that wasn't a rhetorical question. Homo sapiens share the planet with at least two other named groups of humans, the Neanderthals and the Denisovans, and quite possibly others we haven't identified yet. When our ancestors crossed paths with them, there were three possible outcomes: conflict, mutual avoidance, or coming together. All three happened, sometimes in the very same regions, just a few thousand years apart. The first possibility was violence. New arrivals from Africa weren't always greeted warmly. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, researchers examined a Neanderthal skeleton known as Shanidar III and found a sharp, deep wound cut into his left ninth rib. Researcher Stephen Churchill was cautious about drawing broad conclusions. He wasn't claiming evidence of warfare, but he noted the injury matched what a projectile weapon would leave behind. And only one species in that valley had projectile weapon. That's evidence of at least one violent encounter between the two. A second Neanderthal skeleton, found in France and dated to roughly 36,000 years ago, shows a scalp wound consistent with a sharp object, quite possibly inflicted by a modern human. So the danger was genuine, but violence wasn't the only outcome. The second possibility was simply missing each other entirely. In some regions, Neanderthals and modern humans appear to have occupied the same valley centuries apart, like tenants whose leases never overlapped. Archaeological layers across parts of Europe show modern human tools, showing up only after Neanderthal tools disappear. No sign of direct contact at all. And the third possibility, the one almost nobody expects, is that they fell for each other, or at the very least, they mated. This is where the story takes a turn. In 2010, researchers sequenced a Neanderthal genome from bone fragments recovered in a Croatian cave, and when they compared it against modern human DNA, they found something nobody was quite ready for. People of European and East Asian descent today carry roughly 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. People with sub-Saharan African ancestry carry essentially none, meaning their forebears never encountered Neanderthals at all. And this wasn't a single freak occurrence. It happened repeatedly in different places across tens of thousands of years. The oldest physical evidence comes from Skhul Cave on Mount Carmel in Israel, a child's skeleton roughly 140,000 years old, showing a blend of Neanderthal and modern human traits. Not just a genetic trace, but an actual child of mixed ancestry buried by people who cared enough to lay her to rest properly. Then there's Ustenshim Man, a modern human who lived in Siberia around 45,000 years ago. When his genome was sequenced, researchers noticed his Neanderthal DNA segments were unusually long, longer than what shows up in people alive today. Long segments mean fewer generations have passed to break them apart through recombination. From that, scientists worked out that his Neanderthal ancestor lived only around 10,000 years before he did. In a sense, his grandparents had crossed paths with Neanderthals directly. Then there's the most extreme example of all. A jawbone unearthed in Romania in 2002 belonging to a man now known as Awasi-1 who lived roughly 40,000 years ago. Sequencing his genome revealed a Neanderthal ancestor just 4 to 6 generations back. Between 6 and 9% of his entire genome was Neanderthal. Roughly speaking, his great-great-grandparent belonged to a different species entirely. So these encounters weren't rare exceptions. They were happening continuously in campsites, dwellings, and river valleys, across the full span of humanity spread out of Africa. But Neanderthals weren't the only other humans out there. In 2010, inside Denisova Cave in southern Siberia, researchers pulled ancient DNA from a tiny pinky bone fragment. They expected it to be Neanderthal. It wasn't. It belonged to an entirely unknown group of humans, the Denisovans, a group we still don't have a proper name for beyond that. We know them from just 7 bones and a single jawbone scattered across Siberia and the Tibetan Plateau. 7 bones. That's the complete physical record of an entire branch of humanity, and yet their DNA tells a story nearly as intimate as the Neanderthals does. Small traces of Denisovan DNA show up today across East and South Asia, and among some Melanesian populations in the Southwest Pacific, it makes up as much as 6% of the genome. So Homo sapiens didn't encounter just one other human species on their journey around the globe. They met at least 2 and interbred with both. But interbreeding is the easy part to trace. It leaves a permanent signature in our DNA. What's harder to spot, and far more compelling, is everything that happened in between, because these species didn't merely cross paths and disappear into each other's bloodlines. In certain places, they built something close to a shared existence. At Uysal Gutkal's Skhul Cave on the coast of modern-day Turkey, archaeologists spent 5 years digging through layer after layer. Neanderthals occupied the site from roughly 77,000 to 59,000 years ago. Then Homo sapiens moved into that exact same space from about 59,000 down to 47,000 years ago. When researchers compared nearly 20,000 stone tools pulled from every layer, the tool-making style barely shifted regardless of which species had made them, as if the cave itself had passed down instructions to each new occupant. Then there were the shells. Both species, separated by thousands of years, gathered the exact same type of marine shell with zero nutritional value collected purely for the sake of having them. Researchers now suspect this wasn't coincidence at all. It looks like a habit quietly passed from one species to the next, 2 different kinds of human, crouched on the same beach for the same pointless beautiful reason. That's not instinct. That's culture crossing a species boundary, and it runs deeper than shells. At Skhul Cave in Israel, researchers uncovered something that hadn't been documented from this era in 50 years: deliberate formal burial. Bodies laid to rest with care, red ochre placed beside them, used purely for symbolic meaning, not survival. This custom wasn't tied to a single species. Both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens in the region appear to have practiced it. Researchers studying the site argue that contact between the 2 groups didn't just happen passively, it pushed both toward greater symbolism, ritual, and social complexity. So picture the whole spectrum. In one valley, a spear thrown in anger, a rib bone carrying that scar for 50,000 years. In another cave, centuries of quiet handoffs, one species picking up tools the last one left behind. And elsewhere, 2 species burying their dead the same way, marked with the same ochre by people who may never have shared a single word of language. Violence happened, avoidance happened, but so did something resembling neighbors sharing fires, tools, and burial rites for over 20,000 years in some corners of the world. We've long told this as a story about who came out on top. Modern humans surviving, everyone else going extinct, end of story. But what the caves actually describe isn't a contest, it's an overlap. Species close enough for long enough that their tools blended together and their traditions blended together long before their DNA ever did. They didn't simply cross our path on their way to extinction. For thousands of years they lived alongside us. And within that overlap, the shared shells, the shared fires, the shared graves, lies the real answer to what ancient humans did when they encountered another human species. They didn't just endure one another, they built something together, without ever knowing that history would erase everyone involved except the one species left to tell the story.